This series is based upon and inspired by the 2021 series Squid Game, created by Hwang Dong-hyuk and produced by Netflix. It also features art created by the fabulous Andrew MacLaine. Each future episode will air its first part on a Friday, followed by its second part on the Sunday. This will continue until the season finale on Sunday, the 22nd of December. See my Twitter in the link for further details. Without further ado, episode 2A will now begin. Above the doors at the front of the azure-lit dormitory, the large screen displays the words "Players remaining" on the left, with the number 119 below. While armed circle guards patrol around them, most surviving players are exhausted, dazed, upset, or a mixture of these emotions. The volume throughout the room remains low, with many players either sleeping, tending to their wounds, or engaging in quiet conversations. Towards the front of the dormitory, Helen, player 22, sits up on her bed with closed eyes. She breathes deeply in a rhythmic manner, alternating between long inhalations and exhalations. Yet after a minute, she suddenly mutters, "Darn it," then opens her eyes and looks over to see Alan, player 23, examining the bite on his ankle. After watching Alan put his sock back on, Helen thanks him for helping her at the end of the earlier game. He looks up and frowns, until he realizes that Helen is talking to him. He says it was all a blur, but after she says nothing in response, he says she is welcome. Helen gives a timid smile back and asks how Alan's ankle is feeling, to which he flippantly replies that rabies is probably the least of his worries, given how close to dying he was earlier. Helen blinks and glances down to her hands. She looks like she is about to say something amusing, when Alan asks if she was meditating earlier. She seems slightly embarrassed and looks away, but replies that someone said it would be good for her. Player 21, a tall young man with spiky black hair, is listening from the adjacent bed and scoffs discreetly when he hears this. Helen and Alan are then distracted by shouting from player 25, a short, balding man, a few beds along the row. He loudly protests that someone has taken his ring, then pulls up the sheets from the bed belonging to the now deceased player 24, before stomping over to Tracy, player 26, and demanding to know where his ring is. She is lying back on her bed at this moment and slowly looks up, then asks player 25 what the issue is. He snarls and asks if she took his wedding ring, but she replies that she does not have any rings. Player 25 continues to look at Tracy, who asks what the ring looks like. Whilst glancing round the floor, he impatiently describes it as being 24-carat diamond, until he gives up and fumes how these shirty lights aren't bright enough. Player 25 looks back to Tracy, but before he can accuse her further, she asks if the ring came off during the game. He angrily rejects this idea, reasoning that the bloody thing has never come off his hand in 15 years of marriage. He then tells Tracy how she looks like a thief, and a few nearby players glance over. Tracy shows no emotion, and responds that if he stops accusing her, she could help him look for it. Player 25 calmly snorts through his nose, and Tracy glances past him to Yusuf, player 28, who is watching in anticipation. She then turns back to player 25 and calmly places her hands out, displaying each finger. She proceeds to turn out her pockets, then gestures to her bed and offers to let him check inside. He stares in frustration as Tracy pulls back the sheets and beckons him over, asking if he still thinks she stole his ring. His expression gradually changes to one of sheepishness as he steps back. Tracy then comments that she thought they had been through enough for one day. Meanwhile, most players in the middle of the dormitory are sleeping or keeping to themselves. Steve, player 98, is lying back on his bed, seemingly hypnotized by the pale blue lights of the ceiling, until he turns to his right and notices Mary, player 95, facing away on her bed. Steve looks to the back of her head for a while, before getting up and walking past the empty bed of player 97, then that of Diane, player 96, who seems to be asleep. Mary is focused on several conversations she can hear, until Steve asks how she is feeling. She darts round and glares to Steve, who apologizes for scaring her, and explains that he wanted to check how she was feeling. She relaxes her body slightly, but purses her lips, and wistfully responds how she has been both better and worse. Steve nods and informs that he also wanted to apologize for being slow to start in the earlier game. Mary's eyes descend as he speaks, but she eventually replies how that game was enough to scare anyone shirtless. Steve manages a small giggle at this metaphor, and Mary smiles. Steve then tries to explain himself, but he seems unsure of how to start his sentence, until Mary holds up a hand to his shoulder and says how it was clear that something set him off. Steve looks away to the screen, and Mary says that if it weren't for him, she would now be dead. With a smile, she declares how she is therefore grateful to him and puts out her hand to shake. Although Steve appears surprised, he proceeds to shake Mary's hand. She then points ahead to Diane and whispers how she was surprised Her Highness did not lead them to the dogs. Diane twists around in her bed and orders them not to talk about her while she's sleeping. Steve chortles in confusion and replies that she is not asleep, but she snaps back how she was sleeping until they started talking about her. Diane looks away, and Steve asks if she thanked Mary for saving her at the end of the game. Diane sits up in bed and firmly snaps that she helped them both through the whole game, and therefore does not owe them shirt. Steve looks on blankly to Diane, who continues how she is not interested in making friends with them, but only in getting out of this hellhole. She then throws herself back across her bed, and with a disgusted snarl, complains that she wants her normal clothes back. Mary stares ahead, and whispers to Steve that we all process trauma differently. After a while, Steve says he needs to stretch his legs, and Mary nods as he heads towards the back of the dormitory. She turns away, and hears Player 85 begging a nearby circle guard to let her go home so that she can see her children. Mary appears concerned to hear Player 85's voice become louder and more hysterical, until the clicking of the gun's guard sounds when he turns off its safety. The begging from Player 85 then stops. At the back of the dormitory, Nicholas, Player 173, and Joanne, Player 175, are quietly chatting on their beds. In a daze, Joanne comments that she still cannot believe people are actually dead, when Player 177, an overweight middle-aged woman with a greying fringe, marches in from behind. She interrupts Joanne, joking how she thought aerobics was tough, but this was something else, before giving a quick, high-pitched cackle. Nicholas smiles politely, and Player 177 then asks if either of them have any food, to which Nicholas answers that they will receive some shortly. Joanne glances to Nicholas, and Player 177 asks how he knows this. He hesitates, but responds how even if they are fighting to stay alive, they should expect dinner in the evening. He jokes that he could eat a horse, and Player 177 cackles again. She then introduces herself as Pat, and sits down on the vacant bed of Player 174. Nicholas introduces himself and Joanne, who cordially nods back. Whilst Nicholas asks Pat, Player 177, about how she ended up here, Joanne stands up and looks around the dormitory. Upon seeing the number of remaining players on the screen, she suddenly asks why this process is called a Squid Game when they were dealing with dogs. Nicholas and Pat both look up to Joanne, who continues to eye the screen with a curious expression. Pat jokes that she loves squid and could devour some right now with a large glass of white. She gives a quicker cackle, then announces how just the mention of wine has made her neither loo. Whilst Nicholas watches Pat head to the back of the dormitory, Joanne sits down on her bed and stretches back over its side. From this upside-down view, she looks around at the empty beds. After focusing on the bed that belonged to Hugh, Player 176, Joanne thanks Nicholas for helping her through the earlier game. He smiles and assures how he could not leave a lady in danger. At that moment, the lights above gradually change to a more standard colour. The doors beneath the screen are opened, and a torrent of circle guards pass through. Whilst questions are shouted throughout the dormitory, these guards line up ahead of the first row of beds. Then the triangle guards and square guard follow through the doors behind. The clamour of players' voices rises, with many running forward and pleading to go home, along with several shouts of murderers, or liars, or words to this effect. As the sounds of protest increase even further, Square Guard raises his hands, and his voice is heard shouting for silence from the speakers. This initially has the opposite effect, with many players becoming louder, although shortly after the guards take out their guns, silence is achieved. After a moment of calm, Square Guard congratulates the players for completing the first game, but declares that they will need to rest this evening in order to have enough energy for the next day. A few seconds later, 5 large trolleys are pushed into the room. While they are wheeled down a ramp at the back of the platform, Square Guard announces that players will now be given a generous offering of nutrition and medication as a reward for completing the first game. Although some complaints and sarcastic comments can be heard, they are almost drowned out by a flurry of excitement at this news. A few players even rush ahead to the platform, but Square Guard instructs them to return to their beds, adding that everyone will be served. The 5 trolleys are then parked at equidistant gaps between the beds of the first row. The 6 surviving players on this row are pleased to each receive a package containing a bread roll, a block of cheese, a boiled egg, a chicken leg, an apple, a slab of chocolate, a bottle of water, a bandage, 3 plasters, 3 cigarettes, and a box of matches. While these players begin to help themselves from their packages, Square Guard informs that they will now be dismissed in groups to the bathrooms. After staring at the empty bed of Player 1, Yellow Guard walks forward and orders the first row of players to place their packages on their beds, where they will be safely watched. These players seem reluctant, yet soon do as they are asked. Yellow Guard thanks them for their cooperation, and he escorts them through the front doors. The trolleys are then wheeled to the next row, with each surviving player taking a package. Over the next few minutes, more players consume their food and drink, with many applying their medical supplies, including Alan, who quickly begins his first cigarette before placing a plaster over the wound on his ankle. Before he even opens his water bottle, Yusuf takes the duvet from the empty bed of Player 29 and lays it down next to his own, then kneels upon it and begins to pray. Player 19, a pretty young woman with a short blonde bob, bites into her apple and watches Yusuf from the row in front. She begins to narrow her eyes and looks around nervously, but Yusuf is still bowing down and hence unaware of her reaction. Player 18, a short, skin-headed man, approaches Player 19 and, through a mouthful of bread, comments how he hopes they don't get another Lockerbie. Player 19 sits back on her bed and returns her attention to her food. Yusuf calmly sits up and informs Player 18 that he does not want to kill anyone. Player 18 scoffs, and Yusuf asks where he would even find a plane, before muttering "idiot" under his breath. While Yusuf returns to his prayers, some of the circle guards at the front of the dormitory watch as Player 14, a young man with a long side parting, approaches and asks Yusuf in a fiendish tone if he is being cheeky. Helen walks over and asks Player 14 to leave Yusuf alone, as he has done nothing wrong. Player 18 points to Helen and jokes that she must be in his harem. Player 14 then points to Yusuf and asks with a chuckle if she is not worried by that. Helen stutters a little, gestures all around, and frantically answers that you would be stupid not to be scared of anyone in this room. Player 18 frowns, but Helen explains how most people here will do anything to get out of whatever debt they are in. Player 14 scoffs, and Helen continues that she is equally scared of the whites, the browns, and the blacks in this room. Player 17, the older Geordie woman with white curls and glasses, steps in and puts her hand on Player 14's shoulder. She addresses him as Pet, and says he has every right to be upset about what has happened. She then gestures to Yusuf and adds, however, that even if this lad is one of them, there is no need for that sort of jibe. Player 14 sneers at Player 17's hand, which is still placed on his shoulder, when Player 37, a man in his 30s with wavy chestnut curtains, marches over. In a neutral southern accent, he states how a hell of a lot of foreigners were asked to come over here in boats when he was young, in order to help in the hospitals and factories where he lived. Player 18 twists round with a bewildered snarl, and replies that they may have been needed then, but they are not anymore, and so they could just go back to wherever they came from, instead of staying here and taking all the jobs which belong to you and me. Player 37 grins and responds that his parents were immigrants. Following a moment of confusion, Player 18 chuckles, then frowns to Player 37, who reveals that they were from Galway, in Ireland. Player 14 bursts out laughing, and jokes how this does not count, adding that they are not causing any problems, to which Player 37 asks if he has heard of the IRA. The surrounding players watch, and Player 14 appears unsure of what to say. Player 37 walks towards him, and says that like 99.9% of Irishmen over here, he's strongly against their violent methods, although many morons still think he's going to blow something up whenever they find out about his heritage. Player 14 frowns and struggles to form a response. In a strong Irish accent, Player 37 then asks what's the crack with this idea, before winking at Yusuf. However, Player 14 shakes his head and says he bets that his dad, gesturing to Yusuf, will be rolling in money. Yusuf grits his teeth and looks away, until Player 18 walks in and sniggers how his dad was probably the one that bombed that plane. Player 14 chuckles, but Yusuf charges towards Player 18 and tackles him to the ground. Many players gasp as Yusuf starts pummeling Player 18's face. Purple Guard has been watching this confrontation from the front of the dormitory, and she marches in their direction, with several circle guards in tow. Within the ongoing ruckus, Player 14 tries to pull Yusuf off Player 18, but Yusuf reaches back and pushes Player 14 away. As more players approach to see what is happening, Purple Guard fires her gun into the air. Most of the spectating crowd immediately cower in silence, as Player 37 prompts Yusuf up from on top of Player 18. Yusuf barely listens to or even notices Player 14 calling him a savage. Instead, he looks down to Player 18's bleeding face and snarls that he is a racist sack of shirt. Purple Guard then moves to grab Yusuf from behind, but he flinches back against her with great force. Purple Guard loses her balance and falls back onto player 18's bed. Her mask almost falls from her face, revealing some short brown hair through a gap, yet she yelps and acts instantly to hold it in place and keep her face hidden. While Purple Guard scurries back up to her feet, two Circle Guards use force to restrain Yusuf. Player 14 and player 18 are then held back by other Circle Guards, and the players who are watching this fight return to their beds. After Yusuf is practically dragged back to his bed, Purple Guard approaches him with her gun at the ready. She leans down to his reddened face, then advises him to consider this a warning, which she says as she runs her palm along the shaft of the gun. Yusuf points to player 18 and yells that he started this fight. However, Purple Guard interrupts by pointing her gun straight to Yusuf's forehead. He stops talking this instant and shakily leans back. Purple Guard glares to him through her mask for nearly 10 seconds, then begins to walk to the front of the dormitory. However, before she has even reached the next row, Yusuf suddenly bursts out laughing. Purple Guard stops in her tracks and looks back. Then several players return their focus to Yusuf as he continues laughing, and player 18 shouts to shut up. Yet Yusuf's laughter rises in intensity. He barely holds himself on his bed as he points a shaky finger towards player 18. Purple Guard marches back and sternly tells him to stop laughing, although this does little to curb his amusement. Through the ongoing instability of his laughter, Yusuf gestures to player 18 and chuckles that he might not have ended up here if he spent more time focusing on his own life instead of anyone who looked a bit different. Yusuf continues to laugh at player 18, who glares back. Purple Guard approaches Yusuf, but he mockingly holds his hands up and struggles to keep a straight face, which seems to amuse some other players, including Alan, Helen, and player 37. Purple Guard storms back to the front platform, and a higher number of Circle Guards remain in this area, until the first 6 players return from the bathroom and the 7 on the next row are taken by Green Guard. At this moment, the third row to the back are given their packages. Nicholas consumes only some of his package's contents, but gives his chocolate and cheese to Pat, who thanks him kindly in return. As Pat digs in, Joanne discreetly asks Nicholas why he did this, to which he replies that his wife has put him on a diet. Joanne sneaks a peek at Nicholas's relatively slim frame, which he appears to notice. He grins, then whispers to her how it can't hurt to build bridges. A few minutes later, they and the other surviving players on their row are escorted to the bathroom at the far end of the dormitory by Orange Guard. Meanwhile, player 21, Helen, Alan, player 25, Tracy, and Yusuf are taken by Green Guard to use the other bathroom through the front of the dormitory. Both bathrooms are decorated in white and cobalt tiles. The layout of each room forms a T-shape, with sinks and mirrors placed on both sides of the rectangular space at the room's entrance. Shower cubicles of frosted glass form the left side of the room's length, opposite the toilet cubicles along its right side. In the front bathroom, most players have a shower, including Tracy, who initially shows hesitation, but soon appears to appreciate the intensity of the water flow. As for Alan, he has a quick shower, then opens the cubicle door ajar, and looks out to check that no other players can see him. He gingerly opens the door further, and leads out far enough to see himself in the mirror. There are several bruise-like spots on his chest, which he stares at for a few seconds, then itches his fingers against one over his left nipple. Alan notices another small spot in the middle of his chest, and breathes out sullenly when he examines it in the mirror, until player 21 opens the adjacent shower cubicle. Alan pushes himself back into his own cubicle and slams the door, then hurries to dress back into his clothes. Just over an hour later, the final groups of players return from the bathrooms. As they are escorted back to their beds, Square Guard mounts the platform and instructs them all to settle down for the night. The lights throughout the dormitory turn dark, and most players get into their beds, with hardly any objections to this instruction. Many are exhausted and soon fall asleep, while Circle Guards patrol around them. Almost all players sleep through the night, with only a few needing to be escorted by guards to the bathrooms at different times. Early the next morning, the spring theme of Antonio Vivaldi's Four Seasons blasts out from the speakers, and the dormitory's lights turn to their standard colour. The players begin to awaken, and a wave of Circle Guards enters through the front doors. Whilst they form a line before the first row of beds, the 6 Triangle Guards and Square Guard follow through the doors and remain on the platform. During this time, many players drowsily adjust their eyes to the light, while some get out of bed, and a few even run forward, including player 85, who cries out, once again demanding to see her children. Meanwhile, at the back of the dormitory, Nicholas wipes his eyes and jokingly sings, "It's another day for you and me in paradise." Joanne sniggers, but looks to the front screen and notes that the number of remaining players has decreased to 118. Nicholas asks what she means, but before she can reply, several loud cries are heard a few rows ahead. Along with many other players, Nicholas and Joanne look in this direction to see player 130, a woman with an aged-faced and wispy black hair, crying as she crouches by the bed of player 129, a stocky middle-aged man with a red face. Player 130 shouts at the approaching circle guards how she told them he needed more than that damn slither of a bandage. Several players move to get a better view of this scene, and 3 rows ahead, Steve narrates to Mary that the poor sod must have died in the night. While a stretcher is rushed in through the rear end of the dormitory, 2 circle guards walk over and try to move player 130 out the way. She tearfully lashes out at them, but they subdue her with the threat of a gun to her stomach. The other guards proceed to transport player 129's corpse on the stretcher to the back of the dormitory, and a number of players in the rows behind shout in protest. Other guards advance towards those making the most noise, and soon there is almost complete silence, except for a few players that are subsequently dealt with. Once player 129's corpse has been removed through the back doors, Square Guard begins to address the players, although many are still protesting, which stops him from being heard by everyone. The guards quickly deal with any remaining protest, and once silence has resumed, Square Guard announces that he hopes players had a pleasant rest. After another pause, he adds how following the first game, he has decided to enact Rule 3 of the Squid Game. Many players ask each other what the rules are until they are displayed. They then listen as Square Guard recites Rule 3 from the screen above. Games will be terminated if the majority of players agree. Yellow Guard, Purple Guard, and many Circle Guards jolt round to Square Guard. However, he ignores these looks and calls for players to gather in the space before the platform. The players are ushered forwards by Circle Guards, and most seem excited, or at least relieved. Yet when they are all in this space, Square Guard announces how if the majority of players do agree to terminate the games, they will be walking away from the chance to win a prize that will change their lives. Player 123, a young man with several shoulder tattoos and braces, garishly asks what job this grand prize is anyway, as sneers that it really won't be worth what they had to do yesterday. Several players nod in agreement, and some even show vocal support. Square Guard asks player 123 why he thinks the prize is a job. He and a few other players seem perplexed, while a few whisper how they thought it was an opportunity of a lifetime. Square Guard says nothing, but turns to the screen above, still displaying 118 players remaining on its left side. He takes out a remote control and presses a few buttons, which triggers uneasy conversations from the crowd of players, but after a few more attempts, he presses the correct button, and a new graphic of £0 appears on the screen's right side. This addition is immediately noticed and deliberated between players. Square Guard then declares that before deciding to terminate the games, players must be made aware of what is at stake. The amount of money displayed begins to climb from £0, and whispers of excitement sound as it passes £10,000. This amount then accelerates towards £100,000, and these whispers morph into gasps. The money starts increasing at an even faster rate, and players become louder and more jubilant as the amount passes £1 million. For the next 10 seconds, the figure on screen soars through the millions. Some players watch in shock, while others become even more frenzied, and a few cheer enthusiastically. The money on screen finally stops at £7,700,000, and Square Guard allows players to react for almost 10 more seconds, before slowly lifting his hands. Once silence is restored, he explains that for each player eliminated in the games, £100,000 has been added to the prize fund. Player 194, a feeble-looking woman with grubby hair, loudly asks in disgust if this is all a human life is worth, and several players near her nod, with some looking equally indignant. A guard jabs the barrel of her gun into player 194's back, and another guard walks in from the side, holding his gun to her neck. Player 194 shudders, and her body becomes rigid, with a tear forming in her left eye. The nearest players turn back to face the platform. Square Guard then notices the raised hand of player 64, a middle-aged man with a creased forehead. After being nodded to, player 64 points at the amount on screen and says that if 200 players started and 118 are remaining, this means that 82 must have been eliminated. Square Guard responds that this is correct, and player 64 asks why the jackpot is not £8,200,000 for the 82 who have been eliminated. Square Guard clears his throat, before explaining how £100,000 is only added for an eliminated player if they have chosen to play fairly and equally according to the rules. He then informs how there were 5 players eliminated in yesterday's game who failed to follow the rules. Some players seem confused by this explanation, and a few ask what he means or which players these were, but Square Guard does not elaborate any further. They are swiftly distracted when the doors beneath the screen open once more and Circle Guards wheel two small podiums down the ramp behind the platform. Players whisper to each other about what these podiums are for, but when they are placed in front of the platform, it is possible to see that the podium on the left features a green button on top with a tick, whereas the button on the right podium is red with a cross. The whispering dies down, and Square Guard informs that now players know what they are playing for, they will vote on whether they will continue the games. He explains how if they wish to continue the games and stay, they should press the green button, whereas if they wish to terminate the games and leave, they should press the red button. Some players appear to think to themselves, and others quietly discuss their choices with each other, until Square Guard announces that voting will start in reverse order of players' numbers. A human crater gradually forms around player 200, the young woman with a short auburn perm, who looks down to the floor. After a silent pause, she walks through the crowd, daintily biting her upper lip as she reaches the podiums. The room waits in anticipation when player 200 places a hand over each podium. She looks towards the red button and seems tempted to push down, but holds back and gazes past Square Guard to the figure of £7,700,000 on the screen. After a few seconds, she narrows her eyes, moves her hand to the left, and presses down on the green button. Several gasps follow as the Circle Guard orders her to follow him to the open space on the left. The words stay and leave appear on the screen, with the number 1 appearing beneath the former. Some players shout abuse at player 200 when she walks past, but Square Guard's voice reminds from the speakers that each player will be able to cast his own vote. The Circle Guards, many of whom had just raised their guns, lower them back to their sides. With peace restored, Square Guard calls player 198 to vote, and an older, balding man walks forwards. He immediately clonks his fist down on the red button, then stomps over to the left and stands next to player 200, who is already looking away. Player 198 groans how he has a family, to which player 200 snaps that she does too. The next players are called forwards one by one, and the votes start rising evenly. After Pat vehemently hits the red button, both the stay and leave options have 8 votes each. She heads to the left, and player 175 is called. Joanne stoically approaches the podiums, then looks between the buttons. She gazes up to the screen and nods with steady confidence, before hitting the green button and walking over to stand next to Pat, who gapes at her in amazement. Nicholas is the next player to be called, and he strides through the crowd, hits the green button without much hesitation, then moves to the left, nodding reassuringly to Joanne as he joins her. The vote to stay begins to take a slight lead, and player 148, a young Asian woman with long plaited hair, appears to have trouble breathing when her turn approaches, but she is herded ahead by the players around her. Once she is at the podiums, she closes her eyes, exhales, and hits the green button. The votes continue to rise almost evenly, and player 101, a middle-aged woman with a choppy blonde mullet, hits the green button as she limps past the podiums, which puts the total number of votes at 30 to stay and 28 to leave. Player 98 is the next to be called, and Steve tentatively approaches the podiums, then presses the red button and walks to the left without another word. Before player 96 is even called to vote, Diane is pushing ahead past other players. She hits the red button and shoots an extremely sarcastic smile to the triangle guards, then stomps to the left. Player 95 is the next called, and a Circle Guard walks through the crowd towards Mary. She allows him to take her arm and walk with her to the podiums. Once they are in place, the guard quietly informs her which button is which. Mary puts her hand on the red button and looks ready to press down, but suddenly holds still. Following a quiet pause, she breathes out and moves her hand towards the green button. After a few seconds, Red Guard lets out a giggle from the platform above, and several guards of different ranks look towards him. Mary glances up in annoyance, then moves her hand back to the right and presses the red button. This marks the first time in the voting process that there are more votes to leave than to stay, with 31 to 30 respectively. A sudden surge in votes to leave follows, with only a handful of the next 20 players voting to stay. Following this is a slight uptick in votes to stay, but after the red button is hit by player 32, a young woman with bushy peroxide bangs, the number of leave votes stands at 55, compared to just 46 to stay. Player 28 is the next player called to vote. Yusuf walks to the podiums, and after glaring up to Purple Guard, he hits the red podium, then heads to the left. Tracy votes next by pressing the green button. She heads calmly to the left, appearing to avoid eye contact with any other players, although Yusuf looks at her with uncertainty. After player 25 votes to leave, Alan is called forward, seemingly undecided. Almost 30 seconds pass until he moves his hand to the red button. However, he proceeds to whisper, "Fuck it," and presses the green button instead. The next player to vote is Helen, who looks fatigued and pale as she approaches the podiums. She gently presses the red button and walks over to stand next to Alan. After player 19, the pretty young woman with a short blonde bob, hits the red button, there is a total of 59 votes to leave. Some players excitedly whisper as they realise that only one more leave vote is needed to achieve a majority of 60 votes. Player 18, the short, skin-headed man, almost immediately votes to stay, and the next to be called is player 17. The old Geordie woman lets out a hopeful smile and approaches the podiums. She breathes out in relief as she presses the red button, which triggers an immediate cheer of joy through the crowd, with some players hugging each other and even crying in relief. Yet shouting and grumbling is also heard from others, including player 191, the giant of a man, who yells to the guards how those of them who voted to stay should be allowed to. Player 191 then notices player 198, the older balding man, merrily applauding in front. Player 191 roars and pushes player 198 from behind, causing him to fall against some other players. Square Guard clicks his fingers towards this scuffle, and several Soho guards barge into the crowd with their guns at the ready. Even when this fight has been subdued, many players are still loud and frenzied for the dichotomy of reasons. Yet Square Guard's voice then sounds over this clamour, informing players that their exit instructions will be explained shortly. The din surges within the pulsating crowd, and Square Guard continues that this is, however, the end of the games for now. Almost 2 hours later, on a rundown back street in Bristol, Tracy, player 26, gets out of a large dark blue car, dressed in a baggy ripped denim jacket and dirty black trousers. She watches the car with quiet desperation as it drives away, but after it turns the next corner, she steps onto the pavement and heads towards the city centre. Tracy paces along this street for almost 5 minutes, paying no attention to anyone or anything she passes, until she turns onto a calmer side street, where she finds a man and woman sitting against a wall of peeling white paint. They are both dressed in grubby, ripped clothes, and have caps at their feet, containing less than 20 pence between them. The man notices Tracy approaching, and taps the arm of the woman, who looks up and asks where she has been. Tracy responds that something came up, but the man stutters how some guy took her sleeping bag and coat last night, and he got away before they could try to stop him. The woman interrupts, recounting how she ran after this man and was almost hit by a car. A group of youths in school uniforms then walk past, sniggering and mocking the amounts of money in the man and woman's caps. The pair snarl back at these youths as they walk away, although Tracy pays them no attention and asks where Bruce is. Whilst the woman laughs with a wide enough mouth to show many missing teeth, the man points a shaking finger down the street and excitedly stammers that Bruce was in St. Paul's Park earlier that morning. Tracy thanks him, and without delay she paces in this direction. The man asks where she is going, and the woman shouts a few unsavoury words to describe Bruce's character. This causes a mother to scowl from the other side of the street and hurry her daughter along. Tracy marches across Bristol until she reaches St. Paul's Park. After spending the next 15 minutes searching and squinting across the open green spaces, she reaches a large tree-filled field in which a man in a fine leather jacket is looking through a rucksack within a shady cluster of trees. Tracy marches towards him and notices he is talking to a bearded, skeletal figure of a man. Upon spotting her, the man in the leather jacket silently nods to the bearded man to leave, which he does without objection. Bruce eyes Tracy with an amused grin as she slows down and leans against the adjacent tree. He asks in a humorously devious tone what she has for him this morning, but she holds short of replying. Instead, she quietly unlaces her now muddied shoe, and Bruce darts his eyes between her stoic face, her foot, and a nearby dog walker, who glares at the pair, but walks on. Tracy takes off her shoe, and through a hole in the front of her sock, pulls out one of her toes, which holds the diamond wedding ring belonging to player 25. Bruce's eyes light up as he focuses on the ring. He asks where Tracy wrangled this one from, but she simply states 24-carat diamond, and asks how much. Bruce grins and yanks a water bottle from inside his bag. This sudden movement makes Tracy jump and almost fall away from the tree, which causes Bruce to titter. He smirks and inquires if she is feeling nervous, but when she does not answer, he surmises aloud that she must have had a fun weekend. After pointing to the ring on Tracy's toe, Bruce asks, "May I?" in an ironic tone. Tracy nods, and he removes the ring from her toe, then forces it through the neck of his bottle. He holds up the bottle to the morning sun, and when the ring sinks through the water, Tracy seems to relax. He gradually nods and holds the bottle upside down, letting the water flow out, before squeezing the bottle and catching the ring. Bruce turns to Tracy and says, "A ton." She narrows her eyes and replies that he sells seatbelts for higher prices. He raises his eyebrows, but Tracy keeps her composure, adding how there could be more where this came from. Bruce looks towards Tracy's eyes until she looks back at his, whilst forming a fist with her free hand. Yet after a few seconds of silently staring at each other, Bruce chuckles that as she has come in useful here and there, he will offer £140. Tracy appears to contemplate and slowly nods back. While Bruce gathers £140 in notes from his jacket, he orders her to tell Shanks and Tina that he knows where they will be tonight. He follows this instruction with a knowing look, and Tracy nods, but she is clearly paying more attention to the money amassing in his hand. After giving her the money, Bruce tells her to bugger off. Tracy nods in thanks and walks away without another word, whilst Bruce takes out a book from his bag and racks up lines of a white powder upon its cover. For the next half hour, Tracy meanders along a street of busy shops and receives some strange looks from other customers, with a few commenting that dossers should not be allowed into these shops or sentiments to this effect. However, Tracy pays them no attention and buys a red leather jacket, a blue ruffled dress, some high-waisted jeans, and a pair of red Nike trainers, none of which blend very well together, but each of which suits her individually. After walking into a quieter area of the city and onto a calm side street, Tracy sits in exhaustion with her bags of shopping on some withered grass, across the road from a pristinely painted hotel with covered balconies. She then switches her tatty denim jacket and shoes with a leather jacket and red trainers, which she just bought, before crossing the road and checking the nightly rates on the hotel's door. With the money she has left, Tracy can afford to spend at least 3 nights here, yet she hesitantly turns and walks back to sit on the grass. A minute later, she gets up, crosses the road, approaches the hotel door again, but stops and walks back to sit on the grass. She proceeds to repeat this cycle several times over the next 10 minutes. Just when Tracy stands up and finally looks ready to continue down the road, an elderly man with neatly combed white hair comes out through the front door of the hotel and asks if she would like to come in. It seems to take Tracy a while to realise that the man is addressing her, but he assures how there are vacant rooms, and she musters a smile in return. The man watches with intrigue as Tracy approaches the front door, and he asks in a supportive tone if she is quite all right, to which she timidly replies that she is just tired. Tracy pays to stay for 1 night, and the man carries her shopping bags up 3 flights of stairs, then escorts her into a bedroom on the top floor. She looks around at the bed, television and lamps with such wonder that she does not listen to the man's recommendations of places to eat in the area. He proceeds to wish her a pleasant stay and takes his leave. She remains still and maintains a silent smile, then takes off her trainers and lies on the freshly made bed. After sniffing the sheets, she seems at ease and contentedly wraps herself within the duvet for the next few minutes. Just when Tracy is falling asleep, she jerks herself awake and darts her head around, but loosens her grip on the sheets upon appearing to remember where she is. She looks up, heads over to the small fridge by the window, and is about to help herself to a bottle of Carling when she notices the price list on the inside of the fridge. Tracy abruptly closes the fridge, then picks up the phone and calls the reception, asking if it is too late to have breakfast. The old man enthusiastically replies that it is not too late at all, and can be brought up to her room. She seems lost for words, but stammers that she would like this. However, upon looking through to the bathroom and noticing the large bathtub, Tracy asks if her breakfast can be sent up in an hour, as she would like to clean up first, to which the man confirms how this is no problem whatsoever. Tracy thanks him and hangs up, then strips down, carefully folding her new clothes. She begins to cleanse herself in the bath, continually running a comb through her hair, which turns from a dirty brown to a silky chestnut. After an hour of lying within the warm water and periodically humming to herself, Tracy removes herself from the bath. She pulls the plug and looks down in an amused disgust at the amount of dirt which has gathered around the plug hole. She puts on a bathrobe and lies in her bed, then gasps with excitement when she notices the remote control on the bedside table. She turns on the television and spends the next 10 minutes blissfully flicking the channels between Pingu, the film Gandhi, and a news report from West Berlin, but she does not spend any longer than 30 seconds on a channel before switching to the next. However, just as Tracy appears to settle on watching the footage from Berlin, in which East German refugees are being interviewed by British reporters, the door knocks, and the old man calls that he has her breakfast ready. During this time, in the outskirts of a small town in Essex, Nicholas, player 173, opens the gate before a sizable red-bricked country house. He moves to hide behind a large tree, then eyes the windows of the ground floor. After spotting no movement inside the house, he removes a car key from his pocket. Nicholas creeps past an immaculately cleaned Ford Escort, then unlocks a silver Citroen XM and pulls out a large black suitcase from its back seat. After rearranging his hair and loosening his green tie, he passes a row of finely trimmed hedges and saunters up to the front door. He exhales, unlocks the front door, and steps in. As Nicholas turns to lock the door behind him, a slender woman of his age with voluminous blonde curls and a modest tan eagerly approaches through the hallway. Nicholas' wife explains that she did not hear the car coming in, but it is a nice surprise for him to be home early. He smiles and kisses her neck, then lifts her off the ground. She grins and wraps her legs around his waist. He looks into her eyes, and addressing her as Christine, says he missed her. Christine grips the hair on the back of Nicholas's head as he pins her against the door, until they hear the clatter of cutlery beyond the hallway, and she whispers that the kids have not gone yet. Nicholas chortles and carefully lowers Christine to the floor, then places his hand on her lower back. Whilst they walk through the hall, she asks how the return journey was. Nicholas blinks, but dazedly replies, "Over now." He and Christine proceed into a spacious and finely decorated kitchen, furnished with a range of modern appliances and floral arrangements, along with counters and chairs of different woods. Nicholas' teenage son and daughter are sat eating bowls of raisin splits at the opposite end of the large kitchen island, but when she sees her father, Nicholas' daughter jumps up and runs to hug him. He smiles and hugs her in return, then gives a friendly ruffle through the hair of his son, who cheekily grins back. Christine begins to make Nicholas breakfast and addresses the children as Gary and Karen, reminding them to hurry up, because they need to leave for school in 5 minutes. Christine then asks how Birmingham was. Nicholas sits down next to his children, and gleefully replies that he secured the Benidorm route. Christine whips around and gasps how wonderful this is, then jokes, "Pina coladas for all." Nicholas turns back and assures how he can most likely arrange something for the summer. Nicholas continues that on the topic of pina coladas, Big Rob got completely legless the other night and fell in the swimming pool. Christine turns with a smirk and jokes that Big Sue will have a heart attack if she hears about this. However, Nicholas orders her not to say anything, as he promised Big Rob to keep this a secret. Christine giggles, but nods in accordance. Nicholas looks back to his children and gradually pulls a mischievous face towards Karen, who soon notices and struggles to keep a straight face as they make eye contact. Nicholas asks what she did over the weekend, and after finishing a mouthful of cereal, Karen replies that she went to her friend's house for a sleepover, where they watched Dirty Dancing and Pretty in Pink. Nicholas listens to Karen express how much she wants to watch both these films again, and she asks in a delicate tone if she can have some money to buy the videos when she goes shopping next weekend. Nicholas reminds Karen how he has already given her and her brother their pocket money for the week. She seems slightly disheartened and responds that it will be a month until she can afford to buy both the videos, and she cannot wait this long. Gary says that Karen could rent from Blockbuster. She frowns and asks what a Blockbuster is, but Nicholas ignores the suggestion and hesitantly states how he might be able to give her something extra if she does a few more chores. Karen seems sufficiently hopeful, and Nicholas turns his attention to Gary, asking how his history test went. Through a mouthful of cereal, Gary exclaims that he scored 18 out of 20. Nicholas gives a moderate smile, but asks why Gary did not score 20 out of 20 instead. Gary falters and Nicholas exhales, declaring how he should always expect the best from himself, as nobody else will. Gary seems affected, but Nicholas winks and he musters a grin in return. Christine looks at the clock and gasps, ordering the children to get moving this instant. Within seconds they get to their feet, and Christine grabs their school bags from the counter, while Nicholas looks towards the phone on the wall. Karen quickly gives Nicholas a hug when she walks past, which he returns, before asking Gary what he should expect from himself. Gary smiles and replies, "The best." Nicholas beams back that he is proud of them both, and whilst they leave the house, he takes the phone from the hook on the wall. Christine finally closes the front door and walks back into the kitchen, letting out an exaggerated sigh of relief and unbuttoning her blouse, but Nicholas holds the phone close to his ear and says he will be there soon. Christine watches in exasperation as he hangs up the phone, and she complains that he has just got back. He gives a sympathetic smile, and she asks if he will be worked all the way to the grave. Nicholas advances towards Christine and runs his hands along her arms, replying that he only needs to drop a file, which should not take long. Christine reluctantly nods and runs her hands up Nicholas's chest. He grins and forcefully slaps her bottom, making her gasp and giggle coyly. He then runs his hand up the nape of her neck, which he holds as he whispers, "Be right back." Nicholas turns and marches to the front door, then paces down the driveway and practically jumps into his silver Ford Escort. He heads towards the main road, and whilst navigating the gears, pulls his tie back into place. Nicholas drives speedily and somewhat erratically into town, often swerving and overtaking other cars whenever possible. After 10 minutes, he arrives on a shabby yet developed street and parks across the road from a building with a large orange sign which advertises itself as a job centre. Nicholas darts across the street, looks both ways along the pavement, and enters the building. He is met with the sight of a long queue, sounds of desperate conversations mingled with unanswered phones, and a lingering smell of nicotine. Nicholas grits his teeth and joins the queue behind a young man in a mismatched green jacket and baggy jeans, who has just exhaled a cloud of smoke. Nicholas coughs as the smell hits him, but he watches the young man read from the job adverts on the adjacent wall. He struggles to sound out a word, then notices that he is being watched by Nicholas. He continues his attempt to decipher the advert, until Nicholas asks if he would like to know what this word says. He nods timidly, and Nicholas reads, "cleaner." The young man screws up his face and shakes his head. Nicholas looks at the pay rate and jokes that whoever made this advert needs to change their medication, which makes the young man snigger. As the queue trickles towards the indifferent staff at the desks ahead, he asks for more adverts to be deciphered, which is done by Nicholas without objection. After 5 minutes, the young man finishes his cigarette, which he drops to the ground. When he opens his packet for another, Nicholas appears concerned, but the young man does not notice, and asks him to read out another advert. However, instead of doing this, Nicholas explains how he has asthma, and civilly asks him not to smoke until they are outside. The young man turns fully round to Nicholas and glares, then uses several swear words to reply that he will do whatever he wants, before lighting his cigarette. Nicholas exhales patiently, but turns and looks around the room for the next few minutes, breathing nasally and tapping his thumbs together. 20 minutes pass, and Nicholas reaches the front of the queue. He is subsequently ordered to the desk of a middle-aged woman who has short blonde curls and a lined face, with a name tag identifying her as Liz. Whilst Nicholas walks forward, Liz whispers, "Not again," under her breath, and types on her computer for a minute, before declaring how there is still nothing fitting his requirements, the last word of which he says with a professional grimace. Nicholas blinks and breathes deeply, but Liz states that there are still open vacancies for hotel porters and HGV drivers in the local area if he has changed his mind. He politely declines these ideas, then asks Liz if she is certain there are no other jobs in the tourism industry. With a touch of impatience, she jabs a finger towards her screen and replies that these are the only ones in the local travel sector. Nicholas does not appear to be listening and stares down to the desk. Liz types into her computer again and raises her eyebrows, then announces in a cautiously jolly tone how there is a position available at a local waste management facility if this would appeal to him instead. Nicholas peers up until his eyes meet Liz's, but she looks back to him with indifference. In a bewildered tone, he quietly repeats the words, "Waste management facility?" Liz nods blankly, and Nicholas exclaims, "Shoveling shirt, eh?" which alerts several surrounding staff and job seekers, as well as the security guard. Liz no longer attempts to mask her disdain, and demands that Nicholas lower his voice. He nods and apologizes, but requests that Liz let him know the second a new job comes up in the local travel centre. A minute later, Nicholas leaves through the front door of the building, exhibiting a pensive glare as he heads back to his car. He puts his hands against the roof of the car and closes his eyes. He breathes in very deeply before smacking the wing mirror, which leaves a cracked web in his reflection. Two hours later in Bradford, Yusuf, player 28, is sat on the edge of a bed in a small darkened room. He is gripping a controller and avidly tapping buttons to play Trojan on a Nintendo ES console. Yusuf is about to eliminate his final opponent of the level when his mother opens the door. He jumps and squints as the sunlight flies in from a window in the corridor, which distracts him and leads to his character being killed. He grunts at his mother how she just made him lose the level. She grumbles that she does not care, then remarks how much it stinks in here, before dropping 3 newspapers on his bed and telling him to check for jobs. Yusuf looks back to the screen and mumbles how he has already applied to 4 this morning. His mother looks at him uncaringly, and after restarting the level, he sighs that job hunting is like a job in itself. Yusuf's mother snaps back that she has never heard such rubbish in her life, but he carries on playing Trojan and pretends not to listen. His mother shakes her head and says he needs to find his own place before January. She then recalls that by the time Yusuf's father was his age, he had his own shop, house, wife, child, and another on the way. When she pauses for breath, Yusuf butts in that he will have another look through the paper when he finishes this level, to which his mother nods and mutters how he had better if he does not want to be on the streets in the new year. She then says she is about to go shopping with his sisters for new clothes, adding that nice things go to those who deserve them. Yusuf nods blankly, and his mother informs that his father has just woken up downstairs. He looks up, but his mother closes the door and leaves him in the earlier darkness. Soon after, Yusuf heads down to the kitchen and grabs a jar of pills from a drawer, which he brings through to the living room, where his father is channel hopping through the television. Whilst Yusuf hears his mother and sisters getting ready to leave by the front door, his father greets him and declares that each of the 4 channels is showing a different load of horse shirt. Yusuf grins and asks if he wants to watch a video instead. After accidentally switching the television to teletext, Yusuf's father tuts and puts down the remote control, then replies how he would like to watch The Terminator, if it has not been nicked again by one of Yusuf's uncles. Yusuf grins and browses through a shelf on the opposite wall, which is lined with VHS tapes. He finds The Terminator and puts it into the VCR player. As Yusuf rewinds the video back to the beginning, his father asks what is with the mug, which initially seems to confuse him, until he realizes that his father is talking about his face. He plays the film from the start, then sullenly replies that he is still having trouble even getting an interview, and claims the stress is being worsened by his mother's interference. His father listens, but asks if there is anything else going on, as he seems jiggered today and has hardly eaten. Yusuf blinks and replies, "Only the looming list of lifelong responsibilities I am yet to achieve, but already should have by the wise old age of 25. His father chuckles and tells him not to give up. He then smirks and claims that Yusuf's mother was told off yesterday for talking too loudly in the mosque. Yusuf grins, and his father adds how the imam needed to stop the men's prayers, as they could hear her gossiping. Yusuf chuckles, and his father humorously recalls how she was most annoyed that the imam and all the other men heard her saying that the imam's wife looked like a fat lizard. Yusuf manages to hold in his laughter until his father bursts out laughing. The pair struggle to contain their amusement, but when they have eventually stopped, Yusuf's father concedes how even though his mother does talk a lot, there is usually some sense behind what she is saying. He continues that she is indeed correct about Yusuf's need for a job, and he does not want to be stuck in here with us, when he could be out there living. Yusuf nods in apparent understanding, and they continue to watch the film for a few more minutes. When Arnold Schwarzenegger's character is searching through a book in a phone box, the phone in the kitchen rings, and Yusuf walks through to answer it. His friend, Issa, greets him, and asks if he will come to the usual place for a lunchtime drink, adding how there is someone he wants him to meet. Yusuf replies that unfortunately he cannot, as he needs to stay at home with his father. However, Yusuf's father shouts at him to go out. He looks through to the living room, and sees his father jokingly putting up a middle finger and pointing it towards the front door. He then laughs down the phone to Issa that he is being ordered to go out, but he will check with his dad. Returning to the living room, Yusuf reminds his father how the doctor advised for someone to be with him at all times, yet his father responds that he will be fine and dandy on his own, and Yusuf should not be sitting in here with a dying man. Yusuf firmly tells his father not to say this, but his father grins and grabs some coins from his pocket. He hands them to Yusuf, and with a wink orders him not to tell his mother. Although he seems surprised, Yusuf takes the money and thanks his father. After grabbing his jacket from the back of a nearby chair, he asks his father once more if he is certain about being left here alone. He orders Yusuf to bugger off and have a good time. Yusuf smiles and turns to leave, but his father puts a hand in his way. With something of a serious tone, he reiterates that both he and Yusuf's mother are very proud of Yusuf, even if his mother might not always say it. Yusuf smiles back, then shakes his father's hand, and heads to the front door. Just over 10 minutes later, Yusuf enters a moderately uncrowded pub, furnished with wooden tables and a snooker table at the far end. He receives some strange looks from a few other patrons, but ignores them, looking around until he spots his friend Issa at a table next to the entrance, dressed in ragged jeans and a red tank top. Issa has his arm round a pretty young woman with a fringed brunette mullet and dark freckles. Yusuf walks back to the table and jokes that Issa's mother would have a fit if she knew this was his local. Issa stands up with a chuckle and shakes Yusuf's hand, then introduces the woman as Alison. She stands to greet Yusuf with a focused smile and extended hand. He seems surprised, but shakes her hand and sits down. Noticing the empty glasses, Yusuf asks what they would like to drink. Issa asks for his usual, while Alison thanks him and asks for a beer. Yusuf nods, but just when he turns to walk to the bar, Alison suddenly shouts that she can't have Foster's beer though, as she is allergic. This invites a few strange looks from other patrons, although Alison ignores them, and in a somewhat apologetic manner, claims it gives her acid reflux. Yusuf nods and heads to the bar. Whilst Alison runs her hand along Issa's leg at the table, Yusuf orders a pint of Carlsberg, a pint of ale, and a glass of orange juice. He brings them back to the table, and Alison apologises for causing a fuss. He assures her not to worry, and jokes how fussy Issa can be with his drinks too. Yet Alison continues that she shouldn't have shouted across the bar like this, although Issa puts his arm around her and says to relax. Alison manages a smile and thanks Yusuf for his understanding. The conversation proceeds to flow, with various topics such as the signing of Colin Hendry to Manchester City, the changing political situation in Czechoslovakia, and the health of Yusuf's father being discussed. During the latter topic, Yusuf informs that due to his father's recent heart attack, he did not want to leave him alone, but his father seemed happy watching a film and insisted he go out. Alison immediately states how as a nurse she would say his father is fine, and the doctor's recommendation sounds like more of a precaution. Yusuf says this is good news, and Alison replies with a kind smile that some rest would be good for his father. The conversation continues, with Alison bitterly joking about the working conditions in her hospital following the recent strikes. After a while, she labels herself a scatterbrain and claims this has reminded her to call her flatmate, who is also a nurse, about their weekly shop. Alison kisses Issa and heads to the phone at the other end of the pub. Yusuf notices Issa's eyeline focused on Alison's waist as she walks away. When she is out of earshot, Yusuf grins and asks how Issa managed this. He responds with a chuckle that they only met this morning, and Yusuf gasps in clear surprise, calling him a sly dog. Issa gleefully explains that Alison came into the garage with a slashed tyre just a few minutes after he opened. Once her tyre was changed, she asked to head upstairs, where they spent the rest of the morning together. Yusuf seems shocked, but impressed, and comments how in the 20 years they have known each other, he has never seen Issa pick up a girl this fast. Issa jokes that Yusuf has never seen him in the wild, and tenses his exposed muscles. Alison comes back from making her phone call and sits down, placing her hand into Issa's. Yusuf watches with a surprised grin as she glugs the rest of her shandy. She puts down the empty glass and with a coy smile, tells Issa it's his round. He promptly chins his drink, then walks up to the bar. While Issa is waiting for the barman to finish serving another customer, Yusuf asks Alison who slashed her tyres, but she continues to watch Issa at the bar. Yusuf seems to wait for a response as he drinks the remains of his orange juice. When Issa starts speaking to the barman, Alison finally turns to Yusuf, who appears confused due to her delayed response. With no emotion, she points to a dark blue van which has just pulled up outside and tells him, "Get in." Yusuf grimaces, then smirks as he looks round to the van and chuckles in confusion. He glances back to Alison with a bewildered smile, but she calmly repeats her instruction to get in the van. Yusuf begins to ask why he would want to get into that van, when she interrupts, addressing him as Player 28, and warning how if he is not in the van in 30 seconds, she will have Issa's neck snapped. Yusuf's mouth opens a little, and he frowns over to the bar, where Issa is laughing and catching up with the barman. Alison smiles into Yusuf's eyes, and his face turns pale. He mutters, "What?" and she nods to Issa, whispering that this idiot could easily meet with an unfortunate accident in the garage. Yusuf's confusion turns into a snarl until he mumbles defensively that they voted to end the games. Alison simply responds how if he does not get a move on, she will also pay his father a visit. His eyes widen as Alison recites his exact address. She adds that his mother and sisters are still in the city, so his father will definitely be alone, because Yusuf left him there, which will make it easy for him to be terminated. Alison briefly juts up her eyebrows to Yusuf, then looks over to Issa, who is now doing shots of vodka with the barman. Alison darts her eyes back and firmly growls at Yusuf to leave now, or she will have his father's throat slit. This causes him to shudder, stand up, and walk to the door. He turns and looks from Issa, who is on his second vodka shot at the bar, to Alison, whose bright green eyes are staring straight into his. She nods to the door behind him, and he turns round. Yusuf shakes as he creeps out the door into the street. He looks to the van on his right, and its back door opens enough to reveal 3 circle guards in cobalt jumpsuits, one of whom beckons him to get in. Yusuf freezes and gasps when the other 2 guards walk to the van's back door. They reach over, grab him by the arms, and force him in without any resistance. The doors slam shut, and the van drives away.